My name is Betsy McIntyre. I live in Barnstable. I remember that as kids, we were just carefree. We could go and do really whatever we wanted to do. If we wanted to go for a bike ride on a Saturday, we'd tell our parents. My best friend then was Gail Campana, now Nightingale. We would just go. Nobody worried about where we were, what was going to happen to us, and we'd eventually get home, and everything was fine. Another thing was that everybody in town knew us, so that if we did anything out of line, my father probably knew it before we got home. And then I had a Wiano Junior sailboat that I lived in all my young teenage years. I had to have a sailboat, and when I first tried rigging a rowboat up with an oar with an old sheet on it, that didn't go with Dad, who was a Crosby boat builder. That just didn't go. So we found me this old Wiano Junior. Had been in dry dock for years, and I had to scrape every inch of paint on it and sand it and scrape it and paint it and caulk it before it would ever go in the water and I could sail. We had a wonderful childhood. The community center was open, everybody went up there, and we were just carefree. It wasn't. And even when my kids were little, I could let them walk up to my mother's on Parker Road, but then the grandchildren came along. No way could I let them out of my sight. And that's sad. We just had a happy childhood, except for the war. That was awful. That changed our lives forever when Dad was gone for so long. It started out between Osterville and Cotuit. There was Can Do It and Have Done It. Two places that the Army came into, and they needed people to teach small boat landings. And so Dad, being a navigator and boat knowledge, he was teaching landings on Sampson's Island, and Cotuit was doing the same at the other side. And that's where he started out. He was also Coast Guard Auxiliary, and he'd be out on patrol at night. And then the Army, in its wisdom, or infinite wisdom, whatever, decided that that wasn't going to work in the winter if they were going to the Philippines with these small craft boats. And so they sent a bunch of guys, my dad, Carl, what was his name, Laurie, that owned the gas station? Carl Stark and Jimmy Lagergren, and sent them down to Camp Gordon Johnston in Apalachicola, Florida, which Dad hated with a passion. It had bugs and snakes, and little Cape Codder was not at all happy there. And from there he got sent to the Philippines, and he stayed until a year after the war ended. He was put in charge of refurbishing an old iron schooner named the Joanna that was going to be going to Japan for either the invasion or the occupation of Japan. And so he refurbished this boat, and they never did go anywhere. And the last year he really just took the bigwigs out for sails on this boat. In 1946, in April, he was able to come home. But my twin sisters were tiny when Dad left. They had no memory of him. And they would say to Mom, "Is that my daddy?" If they saw a man in a uniform, she'd say, "No, you can't say that." And so then they switched it to, "That's not my daddy, is it?" And Allison and I were old enough to know that he was gone and things were tough. And people would bring, old Mr. Hinckley would bring my mother a piece of meat or something from Swift's Market. Or somebody would bring quahogs or fish or something. We always ate well. And the biggest treat for us was on Sunday, Mom would make us melted cheese over saltines with a little Worcestershire and called it Welsh rabbit. And we thought that was wonderful. That was a big treat. Yeah, but times were really hard. And when Dad came home, the twins didn't know him. They had no idea who he was. Who's that man? And I'd show you a picture that we had taken to send to Dad of the four of us, and his picture on the mantelpiece. That's where they went to kiss Daddy goodnight. They'd kiss the picture, and that's what they did the night he got home. Oh, I have wonderful memories. Wonderful memories. My dad and Bunk Crosby of Crosby Yacht and Chet of Chet Crosby were cousins. And we would go down and play with the Crosby kids, and we'd jump off the front where they launched the boats out of Crosby Yacht and swim, a whole bunch of us. And if Dad had a boat down there, we'd take our lunch and jump off that and swim. We had a wonderful time down there. It was perfect. And going sailing, that was the highlight, really. The first time Dad took me out for a lesson, when it was finally ready to go, I had read several books, and he was showing me things, and I know. We get home, and Mom says, well, how'd the lesson go? And Dad says, she's read a book, she knows everything. I was on my own after that. It was mostly Gail that I sailed with. And we had more fun. And she's still my good friend to this day. The strengths that we had were a feeling of community and coming together. And when we went to high school, we met friends from all over the rest of the town of Barnstable. We went to high school grades 7 through 12 in the old high school, which is now John Paul II. And we got to make all kinds of new friends. And it was just a sense of community. We'd go to the football games, we'd do things. We were so scared that first day going to the high school building. We didn't know anybody except our own little group, and it didn't take long to make friends and play sports. I do 103. It was the largest class to come along, and we just celebrated our 60th anniversary in September. There's still a good many of us still living. Anyway, Briar Connor was the assistant. Everybody remembered Briar Connor. He was such a funny man, but was he a disciplinarian? But he was a Red Sox fan, and he knew Gail and I were too, so he'd gather us at lunchtime and quiz us on the stats. We loved Briar Connor. He loved us. We loved our little Methodist church in the middle of Osterville, which is now Checkerberry House, and has wallpaper books on the altar. And I can't even go in there anymore. We were married there, and the kids were baptized. Yep. And that was very special. Well, they all did so far. I don't think we had to motivate them. They were self-motivated. My daughter's lived here all her life with her two kids, who are now older and grown, and she works at the housing assistant, so she's still here. And Bruce is the director of golf at the town of Barnstable. Billy owns Lawn Sense and works in the town of Barnstable and other towns, and they've all stayed here. And most of the grandchildren have too. My youngest granddaughter is a brand new nurse at Cape Cod Hospital. She just graduated from St. Anselm's. She's working on MUGAS free. She told me not to mention her name or say anything embarrassing about her. I could, but I won't. What they do today, it's all on computers. We worked our butts off, and we couldn't go off duty until we had tested all the needles on a cotton swab to make sure they didn't have burrs so they could be re-sterilized and reused. Everything's disposable. We had instrument kits for procedures, and we had to make sure all the instruments were washed and back to go to central supply and be re-sterilized. Now those are throwaway. There's so much, well, I guess they have to because they're so large and they just can't be doing all that. We even had to wash out the doctor's rubber gloves, turn them inside out and powder them and hang them. Dr. Curtis always had his own special pair that we had to take good care of. It was a different time then. Everybody knew each other. The doctors were young. They're still young, but
Betsy was a pediatric nurse.
yeah, I trained at Children's Hospital in Boston, so I worked on pediatrics, and I loved that. My very first job was working for Miss Kathy at the Osterville Library, all through high school. I worked mornings and evenings that gave me all afternoon to go sailing. It was a great job, and I loved it. I love books anyways. And my next job was, I spent a summer as a waitress. That was a big mistake this summer before I went to nurses training. I wasn't a good waitress at all. Then when I got out of nurses training, I had my daughter shortly after that, and I went to work at Cape Cod Hospital in 1957, where we made like $2.25 an hour. And Dr. Bourne, who was a crusty old guy, he went to Boston to find out what the nurses there were making, and he came back, and we got like a $50 an hour raise, a 50-cent an hour raise, and it was wonderful. And now when I see what my granddaughter's making, it's like, wow. Well, that new community center is wonderful. I wish it was closer so local kids could ride their bikes or walk to it, but that's a great place. The libraries have all been updated, and the school. My cousin Reed Hall is the liaison for the police department at Barnstable High, a job that he loves. Spring, without a doubt. My birthday was yesterday. It's Earth Day. My youngest grandson once said to me, we were out in the yard, and I was pointing out things to him, and he said something, and I said, well, you can't fool Mother Nature, Reed. And he says, I think you really are Mother Nature. So this is my favorite season. I come to life in April. When I first got into gardening for the public and had that little greenhouse up by the fitness center in Osterville, Walter Lewis got me into that. And from there we expanded into the barn behind it and had a florist shop, and then we moved to downtown Osterville and had a florist shop. And that was great too. It was an honor to do funerals for people that I knew, and a lot of them were people that I knew, and weddings and things like that. It just felt like an honor to be able to give back in that fashion. My dad's family goes back in Osterville to the 1630s, through Camets and Bacons and Wests and Nyes, Crosbys. It just goes way back. And our mother came from Scotland, which was probably a wonderful thing because she diluted that old Yankee strain. Because we could be a bit crusty too, as Dad was. Betsy McIntyre. I live in Osterville, proudly and all my life.